I don't know how you post a 1.70 ERA, 1.99 FIP, 9-win season, and over 200 innings. You only have a 10-9 record because the Mets can't score more than 1 or 2 runs. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Dillard, bringing you guys back another podcast. This is the Barnyard podcast number 2 with my co-host Clemente. How are you doing, man?
Doing good. Just Saturday, man. Just trying to relax a bit. You know, baseball's starting to come back up. Spring training games are starting. It's just an exciting time overall.
Yeah, I feel that. So before I started the podcast, I told you a little bit about it before, but I actually wanted to show you something. I don't know if you noticed in the background over there is like my Ohtani bobbleheads and a bunch of baseballs that I've collected over like stadiums. But I actually have this over here too. It's like basically
No way, man.
like a scoreboard thing that they were giving out when they were playing the Yankees 2 years ago. So
Dude, that's badass. Is that from the 2011 team?
yes, actually.
Is that Natali Feliz? They built a statue of that moment in the new stadium.
Yeah,
outside the stadium.
I did see that. I'm actually very excited to see that stadium this year. I'm supposed to go see them play the Yankees in May, hopefully, keeping fingers crossed. But yeah, I had to show you that. I thought you might appreciate that. Although I didn't appreciate it because that was the game. Like it was so dumb because we were supposed to go originally to the game before that, where the Yankees, I think, scored over 10 runs on the Rangers that game. But we ended up going to the game where the Yankees got blown out, and Odor actually hit a grand slam. And at that moment, I was like, I drove all the way out to Arlington just to see this. Like, I was so furious. I was so mad at freaking Odor. I was like, why? And all the times you decide to hit a grand slam, you got to hit one now. But I still had a good time, though. It's always a good time to go to Arlington and see that stadium. Although, I'm not going to use that stadium anymore, at least for baseball, which is sad, because I haven't been to any stadium more than I've been to that one. I'm pretty sure you can probably say the same, too. But it will be pretty cool to go to that new stadium and see how it is, even though I kind of feel like they based it too much off of Minute Maid Park. But then again,
Man.
I haven't actually been there in person, so I can't really say that because I have been to Minute Maid Park in person. So, but anyway, let's go ahead and get on to the subjects in the podcast. We have 3 subjects today. First off, we're going to start off with Jackie Bradley Jr., who just signed recently a 2-year deal, $24 million with the Milwaukee Brewers. Before you go ahead and say what you need to say, I'll just say, what is up with the Brewers and signing past Red Sox players? They did it with JBJ, and then they did it with Brock Holt last year. Like, what is their fascination with Red Sox players?
Man, I don't know, man. I guess the Brewers are just trying to, the Red Sox are a championship pedigree franchise, so maybe the Brewers are trying to replicate that.
Yeah, I can see that. Although it's still crazy to me, that 2018 year. I don't like remembering it for obvious reasons, but like, how in the hell did Brock Holt was literally the MVP of that whole postseason, like him and JBJ. Seriously, maybe that's why they're signing him, because they know that they're good in the postseason apparently, because
Right.
both of them went off in 2020. I think Brock Holt was like, I'm pretty sure he's the one who hit the cycle at Yankee Stadium when we got beat. Like, I think it was 15-1. Yeah, it was bad. I try not to remember that stuff, man. That stuff just gives me PTSD. But as far as Bradley's concerned, he's a really weird player. The reason I say that, since 2013, his numbers show that he's a below average player. But like his WOBA and his OPS and his slugging and his on base percentage, it's back and forth in between like being a below average player and an average player since 2013. He's in like that gray area where he's kind of like in between below average and average. It's a really weird spot for him to sit at. His average is obviously not great, but I don't put too much stock into average anyway, so I don't really care about his average. 15 win player, it's not terrible, obviously. Below average in terms of WRC plus, that's really what sticks out to me. As far as like depth is concerned, I don't see Jackie Bradley Jr. being a starter, I think he'll be a backup at best. The reason I say that is because you're not replacing Lorenzo Cain. Cain is elite defensively, and Cain's also a better hitter. Obviously, you're not replacing Yelich. I don't even need to say why on that. And then Garcia. Also, Garcia in right field. I know Garcia isn't a better fielder than Jackie Bradley is because Jackie Bradley is a very, very good defender. But Garcia is also the better hitter, and I'd like to think that the Brewers are more keen on getting their hitters more plate appearances than, hitters that are below average, I would say. Because Garcia is a better hitter. Not by much in terms of WRC+. And about the same amount of plate appearances, Garcia is roughly 10% better. So I don't know if they're willing to give Jackie Bradley Jr. more chances for, plate appearances and give him more opportunities to swing the bat. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't think defense really matters that much in this sense. I think that the Brewers are much better off giving Garcia more playing time, as, like I said, 10% better in the WRC Plus department, meaning creating 10% more runs than JBJ is doing. And it seems like JBJ's offense alone is starting to decline more and more with his age. So there's that. I mean, I know JBJ is a good defender, 53 runs saved and a 36.5 ultimate zone rating in his career. So he's obviously a good defender, but I don't see him being a starter.
How much stock do you put in JBJ's season last year? Because, like we said last pod, it was only a 60-game sample size, which is not even half of a regular season. But if you look for his stats, he had a career high in batted ball percentage, he had a career low in K percentage. He put up 6.6 offensive WAR. He had a 120 WRC plus. How much stock do you put in those offensive stats, if at all?
That's a really good question, honestly, because he did have a 120 WRC plus, which obviously is pretty damn good.
Yeah.
It's pretty good. It's not bad at all. 20% above at league average. That's the thing. I don't know. I really don't think that's the Jackie Bradley Jr. that the Brewers are going to get. 60-game season, like you said. I personally only can put a grain of salt on it. There's a lot of players. I mean, even for Mike Trout standards, like we talked in the last podcast, was even bad for his standards. Yelich, for example, is a prime example of a player who's been very, very good for most of his career, especially in the last 3-4 years, especially since he went to Milwaukee. But, he also even had a really bad season last year for his standards. Still above league average, but nothing close to MVP caliber seasons like he is very capable of doing so. I don't know. I mean, obviously it's good. I don't want to tear down Jackie Bradley Jr. for it. It's not his fault. It's none of the players' fault that it was only a 60-game season. So I can't blame them there. But, you can only put a grain of salt with it. I have no idea. I just don't believe that they're going to get the same amount of production from him this year. If they do, then I will gladly eat my own words and say that Jackie Bradley Jr. is better than what I gave him credit for. But as of right now, I can't put too much stock in only 200 plate appearances. It's not big enough sample size. Because in a full game or a full season where he's going to get around 500, almost 600 plate appearances, I'm not sure that I'm not saying he's not going to be above league average player. I'm just not sure he's going to be around 120 WRC plus guy. But who knows? I could be wrong.
No, I think you're right. I mean, Jackie Bradley Jr. has only had one season in his entire career where he's had over 120 when it comes to WRC plus, and the rest of the seasons were 118 and even below the 100 standard of league average. But Taylor, why do you think it took? Are you surprised that it took this long for a team to sign Bradley Jr.? I mean, he's one of the more recognizable names in baseball. But what do you think? Why did it take until a couple of weeks before the season started for somebody to finally decide to sign Bradley?
I have no idea. I thought the Red Sox were going to re-sign him, to be honest. I thought I was going to have to see him rob us of more home runs like I've seen him do for so many years, because he's a very good defender. That's the one thing that I will give him. And he's flexible in the outfield. That's also important, too. He can play any position in the outfield, although center field. But like I said before, he's not going to be ahead of Lorenzo Cain. Lorenzo Cain's even better defensively in center field than he is, and he's a better hitter. So there's no way, unless, Lorenzo Cain's not playing. That's why I said Jackie Bradley's going to be a bench player at best, a backup player at best, which there's nothing wrong with that. I think he's a solid backup player. But I really don't know. Like I said, I thought the Red Sox would have re-signed him by now. I'm so surprised it took them so long. I'm surprised it took, for example, so many teams to take notice of Odorizzi. I know Odorizzi's kind of like, hasn't been really that great lately. But I'm still surprised nobody picked him up, as a starter. I know several teams need him. For example, the Angels need starters, yet they won't do anything to bolster that, rotation, let alone their bullpen. Paxton's another guy that I'm like, why did it take somebody so long? I was hoping the Yankees would have re-signed him, but, I think that he is a pretty good fit in Seattle. I'm happy for him, but I don't really know, man. That's a really good question. I have no idea why it took people so long to notice Jackie Bradley Jr. and give him a contract, because obviously he deserves to play on a major league organization, whether a starter or backup. So the second thing that we decided we were going to talk about, I know you were curious about it, because I've actually done a full analysis on it. I have like a 5-script page for it, and I actually plan on doing a video that will go into a lot more detail about it, so to better explain and help people decide for themselves who they think is the better player. But we're going to talk about Chapman and Arenado. So I want to know exactly like what you have questions for me about.
Yeah, I mean, I know you've done a deep dive into like Chapman and Arenado, and you're doing like full-on research and like pulling out all sorts of stats from left and right to create this video. And from an outsider's perspective, just from like the surface level, and I think it's pretty close. I mean, Chapman's the better defender, obviously, but Arenado, I think I would give Arenado the slight edge on offense. But I just wanted to know, like, who would? I know this might be spoiling your video, but
that's all right.
I'm not gonna ask. But who do you think is the better third baseman?
The better third baseman?
Yeah.
It's got to be Matt Chapman. It's got to be
really?
Matt Chapman. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I put a lot of stock into defense. Obviously, Matt Chapman is a lot better defensively, although I will give credit to Arenado. Although Chapman is a better defender in terms of defensive runs saved and ultimate zone rating, the one thing that Arenado does outperform him in is outs above average. He has recorded more outs above average, at least since 2017. And that's what matters to me since 2017, is because that's when Matt Chapman made his debut. I'm not going to compare a guy who's been in the league since 2013 to a guy who's been in the league since 2017. I want the same amount of, sample size. So that's why most of my information is from 2017 to 2020, is because that's when Chapman made his debut with the Oakland Athletics. One of the other reasons, and I won't try and explain too much, because like you said, don't want to spoil too much, but to give you at least a good, decent amount of information so you understand where I'm coming from. The big point of this video is it's not even just basically a comparison video. It's also understanding why WRC Plus is so important and how it can tell us so much more than even WOBA. I love WOBA, but even WOBA doesn't tell you a little bit of what WRC Plus tells you, because of the ballpark factors and other factors such as, era and players and all those kind of good things. The thing that I really look at is the WRC Plus, and I look at the home away splits. Those are important. That's the most important thing about this whole comparison video that I will be uploading in the next week, is you look at the home away splits. You look at the fact that Arenado's average 326, WRC Plus 129, OPS over 1. Great numbers, obviously, but then you look at Arenado's away numbers and they tell a much different story. You go from a 326 average, which obviously I don't put stock into average, but I have to when it's so dramatic that it goes from 326 at home to 259 on the road, or his OPS goes from over 1 to 790 on the road, or his WRC Plus goes from 129 to 104, which is barely above league average in terms of WRC Plus. He's barely above league average on the road. And in my personal opinion, I put a lot of stock into how good of a hitter you are on the road. I think that's very important. I think that's why, for example, George Springer is such a fascinating hitter, because George Springer is one of the few players that I know of that is actually a better hitter on the road than he is at home, which is nuts. That's just, it's insane. I don't know why that is. I can't explain that, but he is. He is genuinely a better and more productive hitter on the road than he is at home, which again brings back to the last podcast, makes no sense for why he needs to cheat, because he's a good enough player not to cheat, and he's one of the best players on the road. He's just been very good. So I put a lot of stock into road stats, and then I go to Chapman, and I look at Chapman, and I see that he plays in a pitcher's-friendly park, one of the hardest ballparks to be consistent as a hitter, opposed to Arenado, who plays in Coors Field. Don't need to say much about Coors Field. Obviously, it is the most hitters-friendly park in the league, and it's not even close. I look at Chapman's home stats, and I see that he has 137 WRC+. That is a higher WRC plus than Arenado at Coors Field, which is insane to think about. And then you look at Chapman's away stats, 116 WRC plus. That's much higher than Arenado's stats on the road, meaning that Chapman can hit on the road and is a better hitter. He also has the WOBA down, he has the OPS down, he has the slugging down. The only thing that Arenado beats him in on the road is average, which again, don't put much stock into it because it ignores a huge chunk of offensive production, and the on-base percentage, which is so small that it's basically inconclusive to decide. So I put a lot of stock into home away stats, and I guess the last thing that I'll also say, just to help out some people and let them know that I'm not opposed to using Baseball Reference, because I do prefer stats such as F4 over BWAR. If you look at the OPS plus, which is basically the same idea as WRC plus, such as ballpark factors and etc., it still would say that from 2017 to 2020, Chapman has a higher OPS plus, and he has a higher OPS plus in the last year, which obviously, again, you can't put too much stock into a 2020 season, so I'm not going to criticize Arenado for the fact that he only had an 84 OPS plus, which isn't great because Arenado had a very down season last year. But I don't think that's who he is. Arenado is not a below average player. This whole video is not to tear down Arenado, because I love Arenado. He is an awesome player to watch, and I think that despite the fact that a lot of his numbers, especially his average, which I don't put a lot of stock into, obviously his average is extremely inflated from Coors Field, and that's why I think WRC plus is such an important metric, especially for evaluating hitters that hit mostly at Coors Field, such as Trevor Story as well. The whole point of this video is not to tear down Arenado. It's to fairly compare players, because I don't think it's fair to Matt Chapman to say that Arenado is a better player because he's aided by Coors Field and the fact that we're only going to use average. I don't think that's fair to Matt Chapman. I think that you need to put everybody on the same playing field, use a stat that is able to better quantify their numbers to the exact measurement based on whatever factors that you name off, the most important obviously being a ballpark factor. But the whole point, not to tear them down, put them on the same playing field, and just for future comparison videos that I do, or just people that just love to compare people on Twitter or whatever, or YouTube or whatever, it doesn't matter. If you're one of those people who are big into advanced metrics, or you just love comparing people just because it's fun and that's what you do, that's also what I want to do, is also promote WRC plus, promote the idea that we want to put these players on an even playing field. We don't want average to be just the one-sided metric. We don't want that basic stat that leaves out a significant chunk of offensive production to be a one-and-done stat, just like pitching wins. Some people actually put stock into pitching wins, which I will talk about that later with DeGrom, because I have a lot to say about DeGrom. But like I said, whole point is to put them on an even playing field, and it's not shots at Arenado because I like Arenado. It's just to fairly compare these players.
Man, I'm surprised that you're putting WRC plus over a WOBA and ex-WOBA, since they're like the holy grail of advanced stats for people.
Well, that's the thing. Like WOBA is very important, obviously. Don't get me wrong. I love WOBA. I love expected WOBA. I think that's very important. I think also important stats are like expected slugging. I think slugging is also a very important stat. Although I prefer OPS just because I also like on base percentage. The name of the game is obviously to get on base, so I still think OPS is more important than just using on base percentage alone or slugging alone. So I do think obviously WOBA and such is very important. But WRC Plus is by far my favorite stat just because it is very extensive on being a ballpark factor type of stat. And when you're comparing a guy that hits at a hitter's friendly park like Coors to a pitcher's friendly park like the Coliseum in Oakland, WRC Plus is the best stat and the most accurate stat that you are possibly going to get to fairly compare these players.
Right.
And I think that would be about it because there's a lot of other stuff that I put into it, like specific like games played and things like that, but I'll save that for the video. I don't want to put too much stock or too much information out there because it'll spoil the video. But the last thing that we're going to talk about is Jacob deGrom and Garrett Cole. We're going to talk about, I guess, who is the better pitcher and who has the potential, I guess, moving forward to be the better pitcher. I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, in terms of like their entire career duration, deGrom obviously has like the better like resume when it comes to like advanced stats and like base attacks as well. But I feel like Garrett Cole had a higher peak when he was with the Astros. I mean, would you agree with that statement?
Yes, somewhat. Yeah, I would agree. I do think that moving forward, I think that, and I'm not just saying this as a Yankee fan, I think genuinely moving forward, I think Cole has the bigger upside, or he has at least the potential to pass deGrom. Will he pass deGrom? I don't know. If he doesn't, will I be surprised? No, because deGrom is currently the best pitcher in baseball. He just has the potential to be able to pass deGrom. So I'm not entirely sure. I mean, that's kind of one of those things that I'm not going to try and predict because obviously deGrom is showing no signs of slowing down, and obviously Cole's not showing any signs of slowing down. Like obviously they are the best starting pitchers in the league. deGrom, representing the National League, and then Cole representing the American League. So I'm not entirely sure, to be honest. What do you think?
Well, I think, like I said, deGrom is probably the safer bet of the two. But I don't know, man. Ever since Garrett Cole went to the Astros, he's just like he's risen when it comes to like ranking pitchers. And I want to ask you that, like, why do you think that happened? Like, why all of a sudden did Cole go from like a very good all-star worthy pitcher to like a Cy Young candidate year in and year out when he was traded to Houston? I mean, I know the simple answer is that Houston just fixed him, but like, do you think there's anything specific that he did that he's changed in terms of like pitch selection or like something like that?
I do know that ever since that he went from the Pirates to the Astros, he stopped throwing his sinker. His sinker was giving him a lot of issues. And now that he's relied on his fastball a lot more, he's relied on some more breaking pitches that don't involve the sinker, especially that fastball. It has a ton of life on it, obviously. It's one of the more electric fastballs in the league. Ever since that he stopped throwing the sinker, he's gotten a lot better results. And, the thing is about the Pirates organization is so interesting because the Yankees just got Jameson, too. And I think there's a lot of good players that come out of Pittsburgh. It's just they have poor player development because Cole's came out of there and now he's a Cy Young candidate. And I'm not saying Jameson's going to be that kind of caliber. I'm not saying that. I don't think he's going to be that caliber. But Jameson's numbers, despite the fact that he has suffered some injuries, he is a very solid pitcher to have, a very solid number 2, number 3, especially when you have a guy like Kluber, like Cole. You have Cole, then Kluber, then Jameson, then later if he is healthy. I'm not going to put too much stock into it because I have no idea. I want him to be healthy, but assuming that he is healthy, you have Luis Severino. That's a solid 4 right there. That's a very solid 4 starting rotation right there. But I guess where I'm going with that is Jameson's very solid, and if he comes out and does solid with the Yankees, like he showed similar numbers to one of the seasons with the Pirates, I think it was 2018, where he had like a 3.65 ERA around that same area FIP season. Pretty solid numbers for him. Over 150 or so innings pitched, so it was a pretty good sample size too. which Matt Blake's going to have to do a lot with that. But I do have confidence that Matt Blake will be able to do it. That's what he was hired from the Indians to do. He did wonders with the Indians, with guys like Shane Bieber and Mike Clevenger, for example. So I guess where I'm getting with that, because I kind of got off topic a little bit, but I think the Pirates they have some poor player development, and also with Josh Bell. I think Josh Bell's an even better player than what he's seen, or what we've seen in Pittsburgh, and now that he's with the Washington Nationals, I believe, I think that he could really show a lot more potential and possibly break out from even more than what he did with the Pirates. So, but to answer your question, pretty much the number one underlying factor for why Cole has boosted up his numbers significantly in such a short amount of time, from going to Pittsburgh to Houston, now with New York, is because he stopped throwing his sinker. That was what was killing him in Pittsburgh, and for some reason they wanted him to continue throwing it. I don't know why. I actually just read something a few weeks ago, because Chris Archer is now back with the Rays again, and he talked about the fact that I guess the reason why he struggled in Pittsburgh was because they were having him throw too many two-seam fastballs. And because of that, his numbers were just skyrocketing. Like he had very poor seasons with Pittsburgh. When I know in the past that he was very good with the Rays at one point. Like there was one season where, if I can bring up the numbers right off the bat, for Chris Archer, because I know there was one season in particular with the Rays where he was just extremely, extremely good. Yeah, 2015, over 200 innings, 5.1 F4 season, a 2.90 FIP. That's really, really, really good. So, I mean, he showed potential in the past to be very good when he was with the Rays, but, I did find it very interesting that because of his numbers, skyrocketing and going out of control because of him throwing too many two-seam fastballs. And it makes sense, just because Cole, ever since he stopped throwing his sinker religiously like he used to, he's also had better results too. So I think it just comes down to the Pirates organization not having bad players per se, because they've had a lot of good players come out of their system. I think it all just comes down to the fact that it's just poor player development.
So what you're saying is that Pittsburgh should just scrap what they're doing and do the complete opposite.
I'm not sure what their issue is, but they need to change something in their system, because whatever they are doing for their pitchers, it's not working out. It's not working. The only guy that they've had any positive results from was Felipe Vasquez. And I'm not even going to talk about that guy because he's a piece of shit. So, there you go. That's all I'm going to say about Felipe Vasquez. I'm not going to give him the recognition because he's a loser because of what he did. But in general, the Pirates got to change something. They got to change their system because it's just not working. It didn't work with Cole. They let Cole go, and it didn't work with Jameson. They let Jameson go, and here we are now. And then, Archer had one of his worst seasons ever when he was with the Pirates. So the one other thing that I did want to mention, because I did mention pitching wins earlier, and I didn't want to forget my train of thought on this. I think it's insane that DeGrom had a 1.70 ERA, 1.99 FIP, 9-win season and over 200 innings in 2018. That's nuts. That is literally video game numbers. As far as like ERA and FIP is concerned, I think one of the only starting pitchers with that amount of innings pitched that I can think of right off the top of my head that has pitched that kind of video game numbers was Jake Arrieta when he was with the Cubs, I think in 2015, where he had like a 1.77 ERA, like 1.90 FIP. Like, it was just nuts. It was an insane season from him. But DeGrom in 2018, when he posted these video game numbers, he had a 10-9 record. And that's what I want to talk about. Pitching wins. There's some metrics out there. There's fielding percentage, which is just awful. Awful. There's average, which I just can't stand. And then there's pitching wins. Like, pitching wins might be the worst stat for anybody to ever use as a basis. I don't understand why people put stock into pitching wins. It means absolutely nothing. Pitching wins have never meant anything. If you're telling me that you want a pitcher to have a 20-5 record over DeGrom because DeGrom had 10 wins and 9 losses just because, actually, you know what? I'm not going to even say 20-5 because that's way too much. If you're telling me that you'd rather have a guy that is around a 15 win or even just a 10 win pitcher, but he goes out and loses only, 2-3 games. So just in a hypothetical situation, let's just choose any random pitcher who has 10 wins in a season and 3 losses. And you would rather take that pitcher who has around a 3.50 ERA, just as an example, over DeGrom because DeGrom had a 10-9 record, only one more win than loss. Even though you're not going to look at his ERA, you're not going to look at his FIP, you're not going to look at his XFIP, his WHIP, his SIERA, you're not going to look at his K per 9, his walks per 9, the amount of home runs that he's giving up. Why would you do that? Like, why? This man literally had a 9-win season. How many pitchers can you say have had a 9-win or more season? That's nuts. That is ridiculous. Like, as a pitcher, Mike Trout is posting, 9 to 10 wins in seasons as a hitter and a defender. But DeGrom is doing that almost as a pitcher. And you're telling me that you would rather put stock into the fact that he only had one more win than loss with a 10-9 record? Come on. Like, come on. I don't know. It makes no sense. You tell me what you think.
Yeah, I mean, everything you said I basically agree with. I mean, a pitcher's record is really out of their hands because they can pitch 1 run, 7-inning game, and they still could lose because the offense doesn't show up and do their part. So it's really dumb. It's basically a useless stat. I don't know why it was so popular to begin with, but I think thankfully now more and more people are starting to realize just how useless it is when it comes to evaluating a pitcher and their season.
Yeah, for sure. That's why I was saying. I was just if you put up a 9-win season, I don't care what your record is. I don't care if your record is 0-20 at that point. If you somehow put a 9-win season as a pitcher, I want you as my starting pitcher every single time. You are going up there to the mound every 5th or 6th day without any worry. I'm not worried. And I think what this says more than anything, other than the fact that DeGrom is just a god, a superhuman, he's a ridiculously insane and consistent starting pitcher, it says more about the fact that the Mets just can't score any runs, and that's sad. I don't know how you post a 1.70 ERA, 1.99 FIP, 9-win season, and over 200 innings. You only have a 10-9 record because the Mets can't score more than 1 or 2 runs. 1.70 ERA, in 200 innings, he's not allowing more than 2 runs. How are you not winning those games? That's nuts. And that's why I've said this before. We said it in the podcast last week whenever we were predicting, who's going to win the divisions and stuff. If the Mets do not win that division, or at least they might not win the division, but if they at least don't make it to the playoffs and at least go far with the roster that they have, consisting of also DeGrom and how much offensive talent they have, and they added Lindor, and now they have Carrasco, the season is a complete and utter failure for them. They have no excuse not to make it to the postseason. There's no excuse. People always make the excuse that they look good on paper, which I've always said that. They do look good on paper. But now they look really, really good on paper. They look one of the best teams in baseball on paper. So if they don't make it to the playoffs, it's a failure of a season. There's no excuse for it at this point.
Right. Back to the whole win-loss record in baseball and how it's popular. Do you think a big reason why it's popular is because it's one of those stats that's been around since basically the beginning of baseball, and that people can easily do the math on pen and paper, where when it comes to sabermetrics, it's still fairly new to the game, and a lot of the formulas when it comes to sabermetrics are really complex, where the average person wouldn't really understand how they came up with that number. But when it comes to wins and losses, ERA, strikeouts, innings pitched, those are stats that anybody can do if they have basic math skills, so maybe that's why wins and losses were so popular historically in baseball, is because sabermetrics are still fairly new to the game. So the wins and losses were one of the stats that voters and fans really had. It was a limited amount of stats that were available at the time to the public, so wins and losses were probably one of the more popular stats because of that.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. You hit the nail in the coffin. It just comes down to the fact that that metric, I don't even want to call it a metric. I don't even want to call it a stat because I don't like it. But whatever you want to call it, it's been around since pretty much the beginning of baseball. Same with stats like ERA or hits or runs. It's very basic stats. Um, yeah, basically, it's just been around for as long as I can remember. Um, Also, like you said, it's basic. It's very easy to do.
Right.
I've always been one of those people because I know there's certain people out there that are just like, I don't care about evaluating players. I don't care about advanced metrics. I don't even care about basic metrics. I just want to see my team win. And if you just watch baseball because you want to watch your team win, that's cool. Like if you want to, like that's the whole point of the game. Like obviously you want your team to perform well and win. If that's all that you do, you don't care about stats at all. You just want your team to win. More power to you. You know, I'm not gonna hate on that. I don't care. I'm more just like, if you're gonna be that wise guy on social media who's going to tell other people that they're wrong because you're using pitching wins, please just deactivate your Twitter account. Like seriously, like you can't expect people to take you seriously if you're not going to use every possible outcome in the book. If you're not going to use every tool at your disposal to better evaluate players on social media in particularly, don't tweet because you're literally going to get a lot of hate. And I'm not saying people need to say like rude and mean things. That's not what I'm saying. But, you know, don't expect for people to take you seriously if you're being a smartass or a wise guy and using pitching wins and you're not even putting stock into even basic. Like, I'm not even saying people need to outright and go read about WRC Plus, even though I think it would be awesome if everybody educated themselves on WRC Plus. But, like, at least do us a solid favor. At least do a solid favor. And put more stock into even, like, on-base percentage and slugging. Like, even if you just do on-base percentage and slugging more than you do average, I will applaud you. Like, seriously. Like, that's all that I ask from some of these people. You know, if you want to go above and beyond, and even you could, you know, go to OPS and stuff. I know a lot of ballparks are starting to actually put OPS and such on their scoreboards. I've noticed that MLB is starting to put WRC Plus on their graphics, which that makes me so happy. Like, I get so excited when I see that they put WRC Plus on these graphics, and they're starting to actually educate people and put the stat more out to the public. So people are like, well, maybe MLB didn't explain it, but they're like, well, what is this WRC Plus stat? Let me look it up. And then, you know, it prompts people to want to go and learn more about it. But like I said, if you're one of those people that just wants to watch the game, just to see your team play, I get that too. Not going to fault you for that. That's perfectly fine with me.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different sport, but you can make the same arguments about like win-loss record with like quarterbacks because putting a team's like record on an individual player is like so flawed because there's so many variables that's out of their control. So like in the football example, like a quarterback could like score 30 plus points, but their defense can give up more than that, or their special teams unit can like mess up a play, or their offensive line can like give up a sack, or his receivers might drop balls. It's just way too many variables to pinpoint a win or loss to one individual player, even in positions where the ball's in their hands like the entire time, like the quarterback it does, or like a pitcher does.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, even though like probably one of the sports that I think like you could have a player or individual player or maybe two carry an entire team would obviously be like basketball. You know, the prime example would be LeBron James, just point and blank and simple. Although I still think to a degree, obviously, basketball is obviously a team sport. I think obviously in general, sports are all about teamwork. And like you said, football is very team oriented and baseball is very team oriented. Like baseball
Right.
is one of those sports for sure that you just can't put stock. You can't put pressure and the blame on one guy, especially like DeGrom, who pitches these types of numbers without any offensive support. That's not his fault. I don't know why people think it's okay to blame this guy for no reason. They are blaming him for no reason. There's nothing that he can do about it. I mean, he hits, but I mean, pitchers hitting is dumb anyways. I think that they should implement the
Oh, man.
universal DH rule. I really think it's dumb that they didn't do it. I appreciate that they're not going back to expanded playoffs, but you know, the universal DH should have been a thing. I thought that was an excellent idea because pitchers. Go ahead.
That's a discussion for another day. We can do an entire pod over
Oh
that.
yeah, it's just like I want to see more offensive production, and you'd think the league would be like, okay, let's implement it because we have a DH, and I mean it's pretty obvious. I don't need to explain to you that a DH is going to produce more runs than a pitcher is, for obvious reasons. So it's just like, wow, MLB, you guys you guys did right with the whole expanded playoffs. Thank you for that. But Universal DH, where is that at? Like, why are you guys not implementing the stuff that most of us want? And it's like it's not even advanced people. Like I've seen a lot of even older folks, like people you'd think that would be like, oh, I don't want them to change the rules because I just want baseball to stay the same how it's been. Even a lot of those people are coming to the idea to a universal DH rule, and I'm like, if those people are coming around to it, then you need to implement the rule. Like, there's no excuse. But is there anything else that you wanted to get off your chest, or anything else that you had questions about?
Well, back to I just wanted to expand on your basketball point because basketball, there's less players on the court, so there's only 5 players on the court for a team. But when you compare it to like baseball, where there's 9 on the field, and then football, where there's like 11 on the field, basketball, one person can have a lot more influence in the basketball game just because there's like fewer people on the court. So that's why that's just another point I wanted to like add to how it's different when it comes to like comparing basketball to like comparing it to like football or baseball, where there's like a lot more players on the field for a team.
Yeah, I agree. You're definitely the basketball guy. I just watch it. I'm one of those people, like we were talking about with baseball. I don't really put much like effort into like at least the advanced stats, because I know there's a lot of advanced stats. I know the analytical community is looked differently for basketball than it is for baseball. Like, it's much differently. You'd be able to tell me a lot more because you're into that a lot more than I am. I just watch the games, friggin' Spurs fan right here. So I just watch the Spurs, so I don't really care. As long as they're winning the games. Sometimes I look at the rebounds and assists and stuff like that, but I don't go into like the advanced metrics like VORP and all that stuff, because there's a lot of stats. I mean, I think basketball they're still behind baseball, but I see that they're making a lot of progress as far as the advanced analytical scene is concerned.
Yeah, baseball's in its own field when it comes to advanced stats, man. It's crazy how far ahead they are compared to like basketball and football. And I think that's to do with the fact that it's easier to like track players. When basketball, you got guys moving around the court all the time. So like, how do you put value on like a player being at the right spot at the right time, or like setting a screen at the right spot? Same with football. Like, how do you like quantify an offensive lineman doing his job and like blocking well? Or it's harder to quantify stats when it comes to like football or basketball when you compare it to baseball, where it's just a pitcher versus a hitter for the most part, unless the ball's put in play.
Yeah, I agree with you. Actually, before this podcast ends, I know it's a baseball podcast, but I do want to ask you this question because I'm very curious, just because we're on the topic of, team-oriented sports, with how team-oriented baseball, football, basketball, etc. are. How much stock do you put into advanced analytics with basketball? Because I've seen a lot of people say that the eye test, because obviously the eye test is terrible in baseball. The eye test is so bad in baseball. There's so much more that analytics can tell you that your eye can't tell you. Even just from the fact that certain players have less range than other players do to make a play on a certain ball, right? How much effort, or how much value do you put into advanced metrics with basketball? How different is it compared to baseball?
Well, I think obviously you have to put value in advanced metrics when you compare it to regular stats, and the same thing can be said with basketball. But like I said just earlier, like it's really hard to quantify like how much value a player puts in when the ball isn't in their hands. So I think basketball is like making a lot of progress, but there's still like a lot of like undiscovered value and data that still hasn't shown, or that hasn't like been shown yet to the public, at least the public wise. I'm pretty sure like all these teams and front offices have like their own advanced analytics that they don't share publicly for obvious reasons. But with basketball, it's you gotta put value into their advanced analytics, because not every team plays different styles. Some teams are slower pace, which means while other teams like higher pace, which means that one team might be getting more possessions, which is going to give players more chance to like put up more stats. But when you compare it to like players who are like on slow paced teams that average less possessions a game, then they're going to get less opportunities to like put up better like per game stats. So you have to put stock in it. I love basketball analytics, advanced analytics, but like I still think there's still a lot of progress to be made on that end.
Alrighty. One last thing though, because I know that we're getting pretty high on time right now. One last thing. I know that there's a stat in basketball. I just know that it's called VORP, and I guess it would basically be like equivalent, or try to be equivalent to baseball's F4 or B4 or whatever. You know, trying to evaluate how many wins a player contributes to his team, which I think is awesome. I think that's an awesome stat to have. How much value do you put into that? Because I've seen a lot of people say that they have a problem with a stat like that because they can't see that John Stockton, for example, is a top 3 player of all time because of how high he is on that list. I just wanted to ask what you thought about that.
Well, it's like any other stat. You can't put all your eggs in one basket when it comes to one stat. You gotta like look at it. You gotta look at each stat and see what each stat is saying about a player. Because VORP, value over replacement player, I mean, I think it's like you said, it's probably like the equivalent of like WAR in baseball. But there's cases where WAR doesn't do a player justice when it comes to like how much he contributes to a team, because WAR doesn't like factor into other stuff like defense for basic WAR, at least not defensive WAR, but basic WAR doesn't count towards like defense or like any other stuff. But it's just like any other advanced stat. You can't put all your eggs in one basket when it comes to like one specific stat telling like just how good a player is.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's why, I mean, obviously I prefer, for example, F4 more, but I also do look at B-WAR, and I look at pretty much every analytic that I can. But I just wanted to ask you about that in particular, because I know a lot of people think it's really funny and interesting that John Stockton is in like the top 3 for it, but they're like, there's no way in hell. Like, a lot of people are like, he's not even a top 10 player of all time. Not going to get into it because I'm not the best when it comes to evaluating basketball players. But I just wanted to ask you an opinion on that. But that is about it. That's about all the time that we have for today's podcast. I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. We got a lot of information out of the way. I'm very excited for the future and doing more podcasts with Clemente. Is there anything else that you want to say before we go ahead and wrap this up?
No, man. I mean, if you have any questions of sorts, then just ask us, and me and Dale will be more than happy to like answer any type of questions. We want fans to interact with us, and hopefully we can grow an audience as the season starts.
Sounds great. Well, I guys hope you guys enjoyed the podcast. We will see you guys on the next podcast.